Welcome to True You College Admissions, a conversation about transforming the college planning and application process so that it truly serves students' long-term success and well-being. My name is Angeli Mazel. I am a former Princeton University interviewer, TED Talk speaker, and founder of Anja Education Consultants. I am also the very proud mom of a thriving 24-year-old now in grad school. At Anja Education, our mission is to guide students to college not as an end in itself, but as one step in designing a life of purpose, well-being, and prosperity. We are thrilled to have as our guest today Sabine Hurley, the head of IB classes and the IB coordinator at the Ecole Jeannine Manuel, an international bilingual school in Paris, France. She is French-American, born and raised in the south of France, and then in Berkeley, California. She has taught high school math and both middle and high school English at Jeannine Manuel for 20 years. On a daily basis now, she interacts with students, parents, and teachers, working with them on every aspect of their school lives. Her work includes everything from providing guidance and direction for the IB program to course selection, work on accreditation, university coaching, managing workload, well-being, relationships, and more. She loves teaching and working with teenagers and has never been bored a day in her career. Sabine, thank you so much for being with us today. I knew about Jeannine Manuel just a little from my time teaching in Paris and was really thrilled to meet you at the Challenge Success Leadership Seminar we both participated in over the summer. So let's start with you. Can you tell us what led you to the focus of your work as a teacher and later head of IB at Jeannine Manuel?
Sure. And first of all, I just want to say it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me and for inviting me. I think it's actually very simple how I got into teaching. I had wonderful teachers as I was growing up. I come from a family with a lot of teachers in it, so I think that was in my daily life from a young age. But I used to line up my marbles when I was little and pretend they were my students. And if I was lucky, my sister would join in so that I had a human person to interact with. But I think I was sort of drawn to teaching from a young age and got really inspired by fantastic teachers I had, all the way through high school and then, of course, college.
Wonderful. And how did that kind of evolve within Jeannine Manuel? Because it sounds like you started out as a teacher and then started to get more involved with the IB program, and now you are coordinating it there.
Yeah, that's right. So let's see, I'd been working at the school for about, 13 years, 12 or 13 years. In the latter part of those 12, 13 years, the kind of head of school started giving me more, I guess, serious work to do. They involved me in one of the first waves of our school accreditation process in 2014, I believe it was. And I was working with teams of colleagues. We were writing documents, kind of reflecting on strategy and getting things prepared for the accreditation. I think they were testing to see if I was going to be able to handle certain things. And then they offered me this job, and I said yes, and I've been at it ever since, and I am still teaching while I do this, so keeping a foot in the classroom.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Now, can you tell me something? I know that you have a great team of college counselors at Jeannine Manuel, but you do interact with them, you interact with the students, you interact with parents, and being bicultural, you have a real sense of what the college admissions process is like in various countries. And what I'd be really interested in hearing about is, what do you think the strengths and the challenges are of each country's university admissions process?
Well, so I will preface this by saying, like you said in your intro here, that I am not the college counselor at the school, and I'm not, I'm sort of largely on the extension part of their team, but we definitely have specialists who do this at school. So I'll stay quite general in what I say so as not to misspeak. But Just to give a little perspective, our school is in the center of Paris. We have over 80 nationalities at our school, which is phenomenal. And when they graduate from our school, we offer both the French baccalaureate and the international baccalaureate. Our students really feel that the world is their oyster. And so we find ourselves having 70% of our students go abroad. But abroad doesn't mean necessarily, it means a lot of things. It means the US, the UK, Canada. We're seeing more and more students apply to the Netherlands, a little bit of Italy and Spain, Switzerland, of course, France, but that's local. So I wouldn't be able to go through all of those, sort of processes and compare and contrast, but certainly we see a lot of students considering, let's say, the US, the UK, Canada. And I'd say there's some pretty obvious kind of strengths and challenges for each of, if we look at those three at least. For the US, I think one of the big strengths for the US is this idea that a student doesn't have to already know what they want to do when they apply. And I think that can be a really daunting thing for a student, age 16 to think, my goodness, I already need to know what I want to do for the rest of my life. So the idea of being able to apply to a liberal arts system, I think, is extremely attractive. And I think there's really no other thing like the US college experience. So I think that's a big one. One of the drawbacks, which I'm sure we'll get into, later on in our discussion, is of course, the cost. I'm not being original when I say that, I'm sure. The sort of very labor-intensive application process, and actually something which I can contrast with another country's system, which would be that essentially students are applying at the very beginning of 12th grade. So what's counting is sort of the 9th, 10th, and 11th grade transcripts, and not so much the 12th grade transcript. And so when you've got a kid who maybe is a little slower to kind of get with the program and realize, oh, I really do need to sit down and do some work, and goodness knows there's a lot of those kids out there, it does feel like, they've kind of missed the boat already. And then conversely, you have kids who, get super serious about things starting in 9th grade. And then you just think, can they not maybe enjoy the beginning of high school a little bit? So in contrast, I think for the UK, as an example, in the UK, you apply in the 12th grade year. It's a way less labor intensive application process. You have to write a personal statement essentially. And then for some of the schools like Oxbridge, it's a little different. There's an interview, there are aptitude tests, and etc. But, generally speaking, there's a personal statement, which is very concise. And you are assessed on your baccalaureate results, your exam results, and that's how you know whether you've gotten into the school or not. Now, the advantage of that is that you can take until 12th grade to arrive and figure out, get your act together and get your work ethic together and things like that. So I think it allows a teenager to mature at a more natural pace, let's say. On the other hand, one thing that's a little bit, limiting about the UK process is that you have to apply to a certain course. So you must apply for, let's say, European history or English literature or physics or whatever it is. So that's an example. Canada is a little bit in between the two in a way, but yeah, I think that kind of sums up what I see as the biggest strengths and challenges here.
Yeah, what's interesting is you're having this experience with students in France
Yeah,
at an international school, applying to different educational systems, and over here in the US, we're seeing more and more Americans applying also to the European
that's
programs, to
interesting.
Canada, yeah, to the
Okay.
UK, but also to the programs like you mentioned, like in the Netherlands,
Yeah.
because of the fact that they're English speaking, right? There are so many bachelor degrees in
Yep.
Europe, obviously apart from the UK. And so now we're seeing more and more partly because of the cost,
Absolutely. Yeah.
right? Because that's a consideration for many families. And so it's interesting to hear, the experience from the point of view of schools in different parts of the world.
Yeah. And actually, what you're saying makes me think of something else, which is that as you very like put it into context really nicely, we are a French school. I mean, we're an international school, we're a bilingual school. We've got, all sorts of folks that are very aware of the American application process, but we are in France on a French school calendar We don't end school at 2:15 and then the kids go do sports. Kids here end school days at 4, sometimes 5 p.m., sometimes even 6. Fitting in the US university requirements, I suppose we can call them, into a French school day is not always easy. And that, in connection with your questions about student well-being and things like that, I think that's really an interesting thing to consider. And the fact that, the world is becoming smaller and smaller, people are kind of more and more mobile. I do think, there's just an interesting thing going on there.
Yes, absolutely. Because what we're having to help the kids balance is their academic rigor, right? Their results. In the US, colleges want to see them being challenged, but they also
Yeah,
want to see good results and they
yeah,
want to see extracurriculars,
yeah.
right? So how does that fit in with with a day, a schedule like the one that you're talking about, where students are finishing so much later, right?
Yeah. I mean, at our school, I run the IB program where the students do tend to end around 4, not so much 5 or 6. So that does leave them time to do things. They also have the weekends to, pursue activities and interests. We have a really nice kind of culture at the school of service learning and student run clubs and things like that. And so I do think we are able to, with a lot of people working really hard to make sure that it's working, and also I don't know if you're super familiar with the IB, but in the IB, students do have a sort of extracurricular component that's part of the baccalaureate, right? So they must do this to obtain their baccalaureate, which is nice because it's also a way to valorize that and to show students that that is an important part of being a whole person, not just a student. So we sort of build it in a sense in some of the on-campus activities, and otherwise students are able to do activities. They still have time to do them after school and on weekends, but certainly they don't, we don't have the infrastructures here, nor do we have the same amount of time resources for students to get very heavily involved in sports, for example, for the most of them. I mean, some of them do, but it's not an automatic like it might be in the US.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I feel that this is one of the strengths of the IB program. And as you know, there are many schools in the US that follow the IB model, uh, incorporating the service learning, incorporating the in-depth personal projects, the extended essay, all of those things give students an opportunity to go much deeper, but also to connect what they're learning to the outside world, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you're taking my word that these are the words I use when I present the IB to families, but absolutely. I mean, the IB, in my opinion, presents so many advantages for high school students. I think it's the best education you can possibly get. There, as you mentioned, there's the depth, there's also the breadth, which is really interesting. There's the academic rigor there. There's academic writing at pretty much the highest level I think you would find, if you compared diploma programs elsewhere. And as you mentioned, of course, the service learning. So for me, it's a really complete, really high quality diploma.
Yes, absolutely. So let's switch gears just a little bit now
Yeah.
and talk about what you think the main challenges students and parents are facing today when embarking on the U.S. college planning and admissions process.
Yeah, I mean, what we see here is, first of all, whether you're applying from abroad or from home, everybody knows that in the last few years, there's been a humongous surge in college applications among certain types of schools, actually, and then ironically, not others. And I think that has really presented a pretty severe challenge for students both abroad and in the US, where we've got, I think, parents and students on almost in a different mindset or in a different world. And the parents who attended US colleges didn't have the same college application experience, even though they also had to present extracurriculars and essays and letters of recommendation. So for families, I think it feels very familiar. It feels like it's the same, but the landscape has changed completely. So what we sometimes find is that, families are very dead set on, these 10 universities, and it's the same 10 universities that everybody, wants to apply to. And it just mathematically isn't going to be possible. I mean, there just isn't, that's not possible. So for me, that's an interesting, relatively new from the last 2-3 years, I'd say. That's a new challenge. The rising cost is, I mean, undeniably a massive challenge. If we're talking about the admission process only, I suppose that the cost is once you're there, not once you're applying. But still, I think, it's kind of weighing out the cost benefit. There are a lot of families, and I think the cost exacerbates the first point that I just made. More and more families are saying, well, if it's not these 10 schools, then forget about it. Whereas, in fact, anyway, that's a point maybe for later in the conversation, but perhaps broadening, I think the scope is helpful in this process. I do think another challenge is the labor intensive, process that the college application to the US presents. I mean, I think when you see that there are more and more applicants, and, the students that I work with are definitely smarter than I was back then, probably smarter than I am now. But, they are working at such a high level already. The IB is such a demanding program. The APs are such demanding programs as well. And you add onto that this very labor intensive process, and this need to, sometimes at the cost of their well-being, or sometimes they're not doing extracurriculars for fun anymore. It's just to tick boxes. And you get into this, I think, sometimes model that is just untenable. So I think I'd say it's a combination of those factors.
Yes, that is totally borne out by our experience here. We talk about the 3 C's of college admissions right now: cost, complexity, and competitiveness.
Yeah.
So you've pointed out all of those, right? The labor that's required, the many steps that are now part of it, the fact that from the numbers point of view, it's just impossible for
Yeah.
students to expect what was possible 20 or 30 years ago.
Or even 8 years ago, frankly. I think, I mean, I've seen it since I've been in this role. I've seen a change. And I would add, this is maybe not relevant for some of your audience or your listeners, but in our school, but it sounds like actually it is, when you say that you have more and more US students applying abroad, because of this, and perhaps as a result of students being more globally minded and able to travel and speak languages, students are applying to different countries. And so on top of the US applications, they are also engaging in, UK applications or Canadian applications. And therefore, even though those are less labor intensive, maybe they have language aptitude tests to pass. Maybe they have visa requirements. Maybe there are all sorts of things that are piling on, and that are kind of like doubling, and I think sometimes tripling and quadrupling that load also.
Those are very good points. Absolutely. So, if you, kind of could wave that magic wand, or maybe even forget the magic wand. What do you think that right now are some doable steps that schools, counselors, parents, students can take to make this process more beneficial for long-term success? Because one thing that we touched on, that you mentioned, is student well-being, right?
Yeah.
And the sacrifices that students are making to be competitive in this landscape. So what can we do, now? Maybe you could do 2 steps. What could we do now? And then maybe ideally, what would the
Yeah.
process look like to protect student long-term success and well-being?
Well, I think now, I think the main focus is on mindset. I think changing mindsets is an important, I think, step in improving things now. And I can see that from several perspectives. The first perspective would be the mindset that this is a process, and that you are learning from this process. You are going to become a young adult. You are making choices. You are selecting. You are considering the question of fit. You are looking at your strengths. You're looking at the things you like, that you don't like. What are your preferences? And all of that is part of getting to know yourself better. It's part of becoming an adult. It's part of making choices. And it's part of also kind of making peace with certain choices and accepting certain, I would say, constraints. And so I think focusing on this as a process of growth rather than focusing only on the end target. I mean, I think of Carol Dweck and, growth mindset. I think that is hugely important. I think there are too many young people that are excessively focused on these names. And, almost every adult in the workforce knows that it frankly doesn't matter too much in the end where you went to undergraduate. What matters, especially in these very mobile societies where there's all sorts of skills transferring, from one area to another, it is your mindset, it's your work ethic, it's the skills you're willing to develop and to build. And of course, an undergraduate degree is extremely, precious and important, but perhaps not necessarily from this, that, or the other college. So I think that's the first thing, is to really, and there's a lot of work to be done here, but a real focus for families, for schools, for students on shifting that mindset. And that comes, I think, with, a need for parents to adapt to this changing landscape, which is not an easy thing to do. And I think for later, if we're thinking about later, one idea would be to consider the kind of how long are we going to be able to keep up the competitive aspect of things? How long until it's just too much? I think, how kind of humane and realistic is it to accept that these young people are sacrificing so much for this one thing, which in fact, I mean, I'm an educator, and I think education is the most important thing in the world, but not particularly here at all costs or there at all costs. And I think we need to, hopefully a little bit down the road, consider taking some pressure off of that aspect, the competitiveness, and of course the cost. I do think that will be helpful for long-term success and long-term well-being. I think taking the cost down would reduce some of the pressure these families are feeling to absolutely get into this, that, or the other school. And I think also materially that then changes the competitive aspect. So I think these two are really intrinsically linked.
Thank you. And you've brought up something so important, which dovetails with the research that has been done. There was that study, that Gallup study, that Challenge Success at Stanford refers to a lot, right? Where what is it that predicts long-term success of students? Is it school rank, or is it other factors? And according to that study, it's not the rank of the school. It's how the students, what they do when they get there, as you pointed out, right? So what, and how are graduate schools and how are employers going to look at those students? It's what they do when they get there. Are they being closely mentored by professors? Are they engaging in personal projects and when they get to college? And are they actively involved in that college community? Those are the factors that have been linked to increased GPA in college. If you have an increased GPA, your further outcomes are better. So what you have mentioned is just so key, that we can't just focus on undergrad, right, as a destination.
Right. No, and I think we're starting to see the dangers of doing that. I mean, I think some of these students have lives that don't look like a young person's life. I mean, there needs to be an aspect of being carefree and being a teenager and making mistakes and trying things out. And that is an immensely important part of growing up. And if you feel from the age of 14 that every single thing you do is contributing to this particular very narrow goal, I don't think that's a good life lesson. It's not a realistic way to live life as an adult. It's very rare that ever in your professional life, or even perhaps personal life, that you would ever be in such a kind of a constrained situation with such a narrow objective at the end. So I think it's also an unrealistic approach for teenagers, but not only for teenagers. And again, I'm going to reference Carol Dweck. I mean, and also the idea that, like, it's not just this result that counts, it's the growth and your attitude towards it and your ability to make mistakes and to learn from those mistakes. But yeah, I think we need a real shift there, because I don't think the system that we have in place is necessarily extremely healthy at the moment.
Yes, absolutely. There's a documentary that I saw a few years ago that I sometimes advise to parents and students. It's called Race to Nowhere.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it's, that one, and
Yeah, I do.
piling up of those musts,
Yeah.
the number of APs and all of that. So, and fundamentally, as a parent, I know that really what we're looking for is long-term student
Yeah.
success.
Yeah.
When we really stop to think about it, what do we think, you know, and by the way, some of those highly selective colleges are great fits for certain students, right?
I was going to say, of course, I was going to come to this later, but fit for me is one of the most important factors. It's probably the most important way you can choose a school. And it's not one size fits all. And the other issue, I think, is that I think focusing so narrowly on this one very fixed, homogenous goal for almost everybody um, moves us yet again to sort of an extrinsic form of motivation versus the intrinsic. And there's a whole lot of research, on teenage brains and adult brains too, that shows that of course you're more motivated when the motivation comes from within and not from without. And so I think that there's also that consequence and that aspect, which is that once you get to this college, great. But what has driven you there is this carrot dangling in front of you consistently for 4 years, what are you going to do when that one's gone? So there's that aspect, I think, that's important too.
Very true. Placing that motivation, is it outside yourself or is it coming from
Yeah.
within? Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Now, in terms of, kind of specific advice that you might give parents of, let's start with middle school, kind of middle
Yeah.
school parents, seventh, eighth grade parents who are thinking about high school. Now, I know that Jeannine Manuel goes all the way through, right? So your parents don't have to make that kind of.
Well,
uh
we still get new applicants in, so that's a fair question.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, good.
Yeah.
So yeah, what advice would you give those parents who really are looking, and I get calls like this all the time from parents who are saying, we want to be sure that we're making those right choices for our kids, so that they have that balance between achievement and well-being. What kind of things would you say?
Well, first of all, I think I would say visiting the school and getting a sense for the team that works at the school is immensely important. This makes me think of what you just said about fit and about, what kind of a college experience are the kids getting? And this is exactly the type of advice or that I would give families that are asking questions about this. I would say, does the school have a student-centered approach? Are they trying in their pedagogy, in their approach, to use active teaching methods that are going to keep the kids engaged? Are there opportunities for self-directed learning? Are there opportunities to develop autonomy throughout the curriculum? Are students, going to be able to make choices and then, pursue their interests down particular paths that maybe they've designed for themselves or they've chosen? I think that develops this sense of intrinsic motivation. I would also say, just coming back to the teams, as you said, are they going to have close relationships with, in this case, the teachers, not professors, but also maybe the support staff? If a student is feeling overwhelmed and is in need of guidance for their planning or for their well-being or what have you, are there trusted adults? Do you get the sense in that school community that there will be trusted adults that your child will be able to go to? Will you feel that there's a partnership? I mean, teaching and learning it's a three-way partnership, and there's no way that it works without one of the three. If all three of those aspects aren't working, the student has the responsibility to bring their best work to the table and their best attitude. The teachers need to be bringing their lessons in and interesting and engaging the kids. And then the administrative and support staff also need to be there doing their part to ensure that the students are well, that they're engaged, that they have the resources that they need, and liaising with parents and all of that. And I always tell the students that I see in my office, if one of us isn't doing our job, then it's not going to work. And I think part of making those choices for middle school or early high school is about that. do you get the sense that you're going to be able to be in a relationship and an open dialogue with the school? And then I would add, just because I work in the IB, I mean, do you get a sense that we talked about the autonomy piece and the kind of the choice and the voice, but, are you getting the sense that these students are going to be developing real transferable skills that they're going to be able to take on to high school and then later on to college? I think that's hyper important.
That's a great answer, very complete. Thank you so much. And I know that even though this is a kind of ideal situation where parents do have that
Yes.
choice, of course, we have families who are not going to be able to choose. They're
Yeah.
going to send their kids to the local, their zoned public school. And and I do work with students every year who are in that situation. We have a pro bono initiative, so we're working for free every year with students because we also believe in access to education. In those contexts, students who or parents who don't have those options, do you have any thoughts about things that they could do at home, messages that they could support their kids with at home to make sure that those kids understand their options beyond just accumulating a pile of APs, et cetera?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. I think there are a lot of families that, even whether it's because they are in the public, I mean, I went through public school, so there's, I think, and I got a great education. So I think you can find everything everywhere. And I know that there are parents that are extremely busy that might not have the time to be mega involved in their children's lives, and children also need to be able to develop this autonomy. But I really think taking an interest in what your kids are doing is a simple thing. Getting them to talk about what's going on at school, getting them to, when they get older, when they get into high school, we have these big deadlines in the IB and we share the calendar of deadlines with our families. I mean, that's a really simple thing, but if you post that up on the fridge and you see that something's coming up, you ask your child how they are doing on this particular piece of work and get them to talk about it. I think from that, you get to see whether your child is interested, whether they're engaged with it. Also little things like there are tons of now online university presentations and virtual tours and things like that. I think there are things that you can do even from home now where families can help their children in this kind of overwhelming selection process. That doesn't mean that you have to be at a very fancy private school with a huge team, helicoptering around all of the students all of the time. But I think showing them that you're there and that you care genuinely with real curiosity about what's going on. And eventually, I know this isn't always possible or simple, but I think it still is possible to develop relationships with the teachers or the deans, perhaps, at different schools. So I think making sure that families communicate with the school whenever a child is either feeling overwhelmed or needing a little bit of extra help. Often in big public schools, there are actually a lot of resources. Making sure kids know where the library is or how to take out books that they need to research X, Y, or Z topic. I mean, I think there are all sorts of little things that families can do to support that aren't necessarily fancy or complicated.
Thank you for highlighting the communication piece. It's so, so important, right? On all
Yeah,
levels.
that's for me. With good communication, you can avoid almost all problems. That's my motto at school almost the whole time.
Fantastic. Great. So, could you give us your parting thoughts for families embarking on the college admissions process to help preserve, student well-being as much as possible?
Yeah, and I would say, I'm going to repeat myself a little bit, but I would say that I really think showing your child that you are focused on this journey as a journey of growth and evolution and growing up is extremely important. I think perhaps not having the most rigid list of schools, having a really healthy mix of targets, reaches, and safeties. I think that's a really healthy way of going about things. I think showing your children that you are curious and open to doing research on schools you might not be very familiar with, or maybe they aren't the names that keep coming up, in conversations around. I think having that curiosity is really important. I also think, this question of fit is very, very important. Making sure that children feel that they're choosing the university as much as the university is choosing them. I always say it's like a boyfriend or girlfriend, or I should say partner now, but it's like choosing a relationship. It's not just a one-way thing. You get to make a choice also, and you should be exercising that choice. And I think for students in the situation at my school, and sounds like other schools around the world where there are all sorts of choices, I would advise families to keep it reined in a little bit and have some focus, i.e. not applying to the US, the UK, Canada, Holland, Switzerland, etc. Keeping it focused on maybe one or two geographical areas, I think makes a big difference.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Sabine, for being with us today. And, what you have said is really crucial for the future of our teens, because with people in leadership positions like you who are helping to prioritize a saner and more sustainable college admissions process, we have hope, for the future. So I really hope that your work continues to benefit the young people you work with, the parents you work with, the counselors you work with, and so we can, really build this college admissions process around students' long-term success and well-being. So please join us next week when we give students a voice and hear what they have to say about their experience with a college admissions process and their advice for families, for parents, for counselors, and even for admissions staff. Till then, I wish you all joy in your learning and your life.